Well, hello everybody. This video is going to be about processing the California Nebula, which is this image here, of course, and it's cataloged as NGC 1499. And I took this picture with my Nikon D50 that I converted to full spectrum because this nebulosity is very difficult to get with a stock camera, and that really helped me get it. So I did that, and these were 30-minute long exposures, which is quite long. And I can kind of talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of that. And then also I used my other Nikon D50 camera, which is a stock one, and these cameras are so inexpensive that I decided I might as well just have two of them, have one stock and the other one converted over to full spectrum. So the stars are from a stock camera, which keeps me from having blown out stars, which I'll show you that when we do it, what happens to it. It really ruins them. And then I can also have a better chance to get color. And I processed this to begin with in Deepsky Stacker, and then I used Starnet++ to remove the stars, which also, before I did that part, I opened it up in Gimp and took the TIFF file that I made in Deepsky Stacker and stretched it somewhat to get the stars to show up good so that Starnet could remove them. If you don't stretch it out first, I guess it just doesn't see the stars and it doesn't know what to remove. Now, one of the issues you run into with using an older camera like this is it doesn't have live view, which is nice for focusing and for, composition and things like that. Now, since I'm using this 200mm lens, I don't even battle with focus. I just set it on infinity and I get away with it. It's close enough. If you have a camera with a lot more pixels, mine's 6 megapixel and they're pretty large pixels, but you know how the newer cameras are, you might have 25 megapixels or even 50, and the pixels could be a lot smaller and it can show those problems easier. So what I wanted to show you here, this is a screenshot of actually, I guess last night or the night before, I was taking a few pictures of the Pleiades, but I was using the Nikon D50 again. And anyway, what I do is I connect the camera to my computer with a USB cable, and that allows me, as long as the camera is powered on, to have the folder open that it stores them in, and then I can just double click it and open them up. So that's really nice. I can get a preview really quick of my picture. I don't have to bother with taking the memory card out or anything. And I like that too. Like if I put it on my telescope on, say, the 6-inch Newtonian, and I am trying to get focus, I'll try to put it on a really bright star so that I can have nice short exposures, take a picture, see how the focus is, fine-tune the focus, take another picture, and so on. Now over here in this little text document I started trying to just keep track of what's going on when I'm imaging each night, especially if I'm doing multiple nights. Like here I'm keeping track of what the temperature was, that's in Fahrenheit, and I'd check it about once every hour or whatever and write down if it's real windy or if it's getting dew or whatever. But I like to keep track of that for dark frames, because I've found out sometimes, I can use dark frames from the previous night or whatever if the temperature was similar. Now this camera doesn't have a way to have an intervalometer connected to it, so I have to time my exposures if I'm doing them in bulb. So what I started doing was I would bring up the little clock here down in the bottom right hand corner, and I would just keep an eye on when my exposure started. So I'd click it and say, okay, it started at say 18 minutes and 40 seconds. And if I wanted to do a 5-minute exposure, I'd go over here and I'd just type in like 23:40, whatever the time is that the shutter's supposed to close. So then I'd do it manually, and I found that it just helped me keep track of it. Now here's where I saved all my images that I took of the California Nebula that night, and I've got one here in a dated folder because I plan to do this again on another night. So some of my other folders, like I've done M31, I'm up to 7 or 8 nights. I've been learning to do multiple nights. So that way I can have light frames and dark frames and flats if I need to, all in that folder. And then if I have an issue where I need new darks and all that, I can have them for the other night in its own folder. And I've got my stars only folder, so these are the real short exposures. And here's my information from that night. See if we can get that to open up. There we go. It says the 20th, and I just write down what my camera was, and then here, that was the first time I'd tried 30-minute subs, so this was kind of experimental, and I was really happy with the result. It worked really well. And one of the reasons, in fact the biggest reasons, when I decided to try this, everything I've been reading said that the best ISO to use for long exposures with this camera was ISO 400. And it had to do with just how much noise was in it. And that's what I had been doing with my others. I had been doing mostly ISO 400 for 5 minutes, and that worked pretty decent. But when I started reading, I realized that I would get a better signal to noise ratio with the lower ISO. So I thought, well, I'm going to give it a try. And I'm not sure how much difference it actually made, but because I didn't compare directly 5 minute at 400 and 10 minute at 200 side by side, but I did like the result. And also, this camera, the longest exposure you can do when you have it on bulb is 30 minutes. So it just turns itself off. It closes the shutter after 30 minutes. So that was pretty cool, because then I didn't have to sit there and time it and make sure that I got each one close to the same amount of time. Now, of course, things that can go wrong, if you're doing a 30-minute long exposure, and you mess up an exposure, you just lost 30 minutes of time. If you're doing short exposures, obviously, you can make a mistake and you don't lose as much time. So you could be dealing with airplanes, your neighbor's car, you accidentally bump the tripod, whatever, or maybe, have a guiding problem or something where it just messes it up. Now, this particular night when I did this, I started taking pictures around 2 in the morning and did it until 4 in the morning. And I didn't have any airplanes. So that timed out good. I live about 70 miles from Indianapolis. And the airplanes seem to go over more in the evening till, say, midnight or so, and then start up, 6 in the morning or whatever. And then there's some coming south from Chicago too. But I was in a time where there was almost no airplanes, and if a satellite did go over, you wouldn't see it because it was the middle of the night and the sun was actually on the other side of the earth and wasn't illuminating it. So let's see here. It says that I lost exposure number 6 because I forgot to plug in the AC adapter. And I lucked out. I actually got the exposure back. A couple days later I found it. So when I processed this picture, the one we were looking at, it had 3 different 30-minute subs, and when I process it this time, it's going to have 4. So I had a battery in the camera, and I thought I had plugged in my AC adapter and obviously didn't. And at the end of like the 3rd exposure, it wouldn't let me make another exposure. I thought, oh gee, forgot to plug it in. And then I thought it didn't save the image onto the memory card just because it didn't have enough battery. But like I say, a couple days later, it was there. So then I took one dark frame. Of course, 30-minute long exposure. That's quite a bit of time for the thing just to sit there. And another thing to consider is the temperature might change a lot. Like on this particular night, it didn't change that much. So here at like 2:15 in the morning, it was 45 degrees. Hour and 45 minutes later, it had only dropped a degree. On some nights, it might drop 10 degrees in that amount of time. So that's just something to consider if you're going to try taking exposures this long. You don't necessarily have to. I just decided to try it. I could have got away with 5-minute exposures, but I'd been experimenting with this camera and wondering if I was doing things right and all that. And I thought, well, I'm just going to try this. And let's see here. I made a master flats folder. So since I'm doing this with a camera lens, I don't have to worry about how the camera is positioned as far as rotation the way I would if, say, I put it in the eyepiece holder with an adapter onto a telescope, because you could be rotated differently. And I try to line up a mark with the set screw on the eyepiece holder or something each time to get it close, but it's not precise. So that helps, and I try to use my master flats several times. Sometimes I've used them for several months. Another nice thing about, since I'm using this camera lens, if you've seen my video on my do-it-yourself homemade DSLR holder that looks pretty messy but works really well, I don't really have to worry about rotation because it's always the same. So that's both good and bad. It's good in that it's simple. I just set it up and go, and I'm always got the same position. I guess the downside is if I wanted to rotate the camera to fit an object in there better. So I just end up using a different lens. That's one thing I really like about that holder. I've got this old 200 millimeter Nikon lens. I've got a 300 millimeter lens. I've got a 400 millimeter lens. So I can easily use different items, and they're vintage lenses, so I don't have very much money in them at all. So now we'll go into how you load these up in Deepsky Stacker and process them. So we'll open this up, and as you can see, I've got an old 32-bit version. I'm using an older computer right now. This is just an old 32-bit Windows 7. I'm gradually moving into something newer, but this has been working for me quite well. As long as I'm using older cameras and stuff, it's no problem at all. So we start off, we got to open our picture files, and it'll call them as light frames. And well, since I'm already in this stars only folder, we'll just do them first. And I took these for, I don't remember the exact amount of time. It might have been 45 minutes or so of just constant 30-second exposures. So open those up. And then to view them, I'm just going to check this first one, and then you highlight it, click it once, and it'll pop up here in a few seconds. As you can see, it's solid black. This is a raw file. Now up here, I can stretch this out, and this is just a preview stretch. It doesn't change the actual file. My understanding is it won't affect your stacking results at all. So I'm just going to crank this way over here. And there it starts to bring them up. And you can also kind of maybe see where the vignetting is. It's brighter in the center. I'll bring it a little higher. I don't know how well it shows on the video. Anyway, you can see it's brought up a lot of stars and stuff, and you can actually almost see the nebula. So we've got those brought up, and then next I'm going to bring my darks, and it's already set for this one too, so I'll bring the darks for, yeah, stars only. I'm going to make sure I had the right one. So I took those that same night. So now I've got dark frames down here in the list, and I'll show you that too here in a minute. And then I'm going to do my flats. And here it says, I mentioned that I made a master set of them. So I've just got them saved in a folder that I titled Flats with the 200mm lens. And this is the stock camera. So this, since this is stars only, and I had it on ISO 400. So whenever I would change any of that stuff, I'm making a different set of flats just in case. You definitely would if you were making darks. I'll open those up. I didn't do dark flats. Apparently a dark flat can be used instead of a bias. And what you would do is, after you shoot your flats, you just put a lens cap on and shoot them, and they're just darks of your flats. So it would be based on the exposure time and ISO of your flats. But I had just been in the habit of doing these bias, and I've just kept doing it. So these bias frames, this here, when you do this, see here, I've got it on ISO 400, and it says new D50. That's just a stock one because that just happened to be the one that I had bought after I did surgery on the other. And I did it at ISO 400, and I used the shortest exposure possible, which I think was 4,000ths of a second. And that's to get rid of a baseline kind of read noise that there's noise in the camera just automatically from processing, and it's just going to get rid of that. And let's see here what I go down to next. I click check all so that it'll use them. And then if there's any you don't want, you would need to uncheck them. But we'll go over some of what you got here. Of course, it tells you the path and all that, and it says this is a light file. So that was image, and then it gives them a score on the quality of the image, the size. And then over here it says they're raw. And I'll slide my slider over a little farther, and it says they were ISO 400. So Deepsky Stacker knows if you mix up your ISOs. It says they were exposures at 30 seconds. It's got your full width half maximum, which has to do with focus. It's today's first time I'd noticed it, but that's on there. Counts how many stars is in each picture. That's one of the things important about Deepsky Stacker. When you take your pictures, if you're doing something with really short exposures, like especially if you can't track at all, like if you're doing it on a tripod and you're doing extremely short exposures, you might not have very many stars. And Deepsky Stacker might struggle with that and actually reject it and go through the process of processing all of those, and then right when it comes time to stack it, it'd pop up an error message that says, we're only going to stack one picture. So that tells you you'd run into that. And in that instance, I end up using Registacks. And then there's plenty of stacking programs out there. I've been using Registacks forever, and experimented with a few of them. There's a lot of good ones out there. So now we'll kind of scroll down here a little bit past the lights. Okay, now we got into some dark frames, and I'll go ahead and highlight one of those. It'll show up here. You can see the bar turns blue when it's open. And we can even drag this over here and see if it shows us. Yeah, so we can start to see some bands and lines. So if you had a bunch of these lines in your pictures, your dark frame could remove a lot of this junk. And up here, it's probably amplifier glow, amp glow. So more frames helps get rid of that, and then the darks definitely. And this will change a little bit. It's kind of dancing around, I think. So we'll go to the next one. So I think the bands might move. Yeah, see, they change. So I took a lot of dark, since they were 30 seconds only. I don't remember how many I took. I just let it run for 10 or 15 minutes, I think. And then we can go down to the flats. Okay. That's because I've got this stretch way up. Let me see if I can drag it over. So the idea of this, it removes vignetting problems. And if you have dirt on your sensor or something, I think I see a little funny spot right there. And you might notice it's darker in the corners. The center is always brighter. It's just the same idea like if you hold a flashlight up to a wall. You know, the edges of the beam are fainter. And the same thing happens here with what it's gathering light. So it gathers more light at the center and less out at the edge. And then this will basically just reverse it out so that you'll end up with a flat looking image instead of real bright in the center and your picture dark on the edges. And let's see. We'll look at the bias, but I don't think we'll see anything on them because they're such a short exposure. But apparently the software sees it, so we'll stretch that up. Maybe it'll show us a little something. Yeah, actually it does. Okay, so I really cranked up the stretch. So it shows up some potential noise there that it can remove. So now that I've got all of these loaded and I've hit check all so that each of them has a check mark, which in this instance there aren't any of them that I want to get rid of. You know, if you have, like say if you bumped your camera or something or had real bad tracking on one, and you could just get on there and uncheck it and remove it. I used to always do that in Registax. I'd take hundreds of pictures with an old Malin cam hyper camera doing 6-second exposures, and some of them I'd get pretty bad movement of the stars with periodic error. So I've got them all checked, and I'm going to click Register Checked Pictures. And we'll go up here, and I've basically got it on default. I've got it to stack 100%. You can change that number. And the star detection, you don't have to do this. I do it a lot of times, but it counts the number of stars. And in this case, I remember seeing something where it said it saw like 300 and something. So it said 350. Now let's say that that number was really big, like 15,000. And you realized that it was going to take forever to process because it was going to count all 15,000 stars and try to line them up on each picture. And if you have hundreds of images, then you'd end up taking forever to process. So I'm just going to move it down here to the middle somewhere. And I'm just going to compute again, and it's going to be a much lower number. And the idea is it'll just process faster. Here it says 13. So if you get too low, it may reject it or it may not register as good. So you just kind of experiment as long as you don't. I usually leave it over here unless I've got something that's just got a ridiculous amount of stars and I figure it'll take forever to process. Let's see what's on actions over here. Okay, that's where I was at to begin with. And I'm going to click OK, and it's going to bring up my stacking steps. Now, one of the things it does here, this time, all of my exposures were the same because I had it on 30 seconds instead of bulb. When I do it on bulb and I'm timing them manually, sometimes I just make a mistake and my 5-minute exposure ends up being 5.5 or even 6. And this will kick it out, and it would put it down here as stacking step number 2 instead of in 1. And you could decide whether you wanted to leave it in there or tell it not to. It's telling me it's got 83 frames. They were 30 seconds each. Its total time is 41 minutes and 30 seconds. I've got most of this stuff here set on default, so I haven't been messing with these other settings. My offset frames, those are the bias frames I talked about. And it said ISO 400 at 1/4000th of a second. This method business, again, that was default. You can change them. Dark frames, it looks like I took 15 of them, so I did about 7.5 minutes at 30 seconds each. Flat frames, I did 54 of them at ISO 400. It said my exposure was 1/160th. And I have a real high-tech method of deciding what my exposure is. Since I can view the pictures on my screen the way I showed you earlier, where I just open it up in the folder, I take pictures of just a blank text document. I'll just open up a blank text document and expand it to full size, and I'll end up having a white screen. And I use that to take my flats. So I'll take pictures of the flats, and between each picture, I'm moving it. I'll have a picture here in the middle, another one over here, another over here, and I rotate the camera around. And the idea is just to try to make sure I don't have any kind of pattern, because it's possible that I've got an area that doesn't illuminate as evenly. Maybe there's a smudge of dirt on the screen or something, and I try to make sure that that doesn't end up being part of the flat and mess up my picture. So now I'll go ahead and click OK here, and it'll start stacking, and it'll take a while, so I'll pause the video while that's going on. So as you can see here, it's calibrating. I'll show you a little bit of this, but I'm not going to make you go through all of it. But it'll add and everything, all this, and it calibrates them and gives them a score if it doesn't already have it. And then we'll look at the final result here in a few minutes. And we'll save out a TIFF file of that, and we can open it up in Gimp. So it's processed it, and we've got a stacked, unstretched RAW file here. Or, well, it's really going to be a TIFF, yeah, because it says up there it's got auto-save TIFF. But one of the things I wanted to show you while I'm thinking about it, I was mentioning that I could view my pictures while I was taking them. And in this instance, I was taking RAW files. Okay, there it says NEF. I had to find it. So this NEF file is a RAW file from my Nikon camera. And I've got it to where I open it up with a viewer called Honey View. I'm sure there's plenty of them out there, free ones. So this actually processes it out and kind of gives you something that you can look at. So this is what, and as you can see, the stars are all blown out at 30-minute long exposure, and it's really kind of hard to see the California Nebula in there, but it's there. And you can see the vignetting, see how bright it is, and also how red everything's got. Since I'm full spectrum, it changes my color balance, so I end up having to play with that, which I've kind of learned to deal with that. It's not that difficult with some practice. Okay, so let's look at we can do a little gentle stretch on here, which is supposed to be for viewing only. It's not supposed to change your actual file, even though it lets you do a lot of things. I always set it back to the beginning here with reset before I save my file, just in case. Now I've clicked link settings, so it's going to move each of the colors all at the same time. If you don't have it linked, you can move your red, green, and blue separately. I'm just going to stretch it out a little bit there. Moved it a little to right, click apply. This is just a way to get a quick preview of what you've got. And we'll go out a little farther. If you go too far, it'll just turn it into a solid white blob. So we're starting to be able to see the North American Nebula, or the California Nebula. And also you might notice it's showing it to you in black and white. But it will give me a color image when I save it in TIFF. Now see there, I've gone just a little too far. Anyway, this is just something you can do to view your output. I'll click reset and apply. Just in case, I don't have to make sure that what I save here is an unprocessed. So we'll click Save Picture to File. Make sure we're going to the right place. And we'll give it a name. I put an N4 in there for a number of frames. As I mentioned before, I only had 3 30-minute exposures, and now I'm going to have 4. So we'll save this. Now we can open this up in Gimp. So this is a nice little free program. Now Gimp will not open a raw file by itself. Deepsky Stacker can open the raw and stack them, and then it outputs a TIFF normally, which this likes. And you can also use raw therapy if you're dealing with individual frames and you want to convert them over to a TIFF, which there will be an unprocessed TIFF. Now we gotta go find where we're at here. Got so many folders. There we go. So this is the one I had tonight. A nice little message and it go away. And so that you can save your original, you can do a couple different options. You can just do a file save as and give it a new name, so that if you decide you trash it and you don't like it, you've still got your original. Or what I've found I do a lot of times is I just click duplicate layer, and I'll turn off the eyeball on the original one, and I'll work off of this, off of the copy of it, and then if I decide I've ruined it, all I gotta do is delete the layer and I've still got the other one. That comes in handy, especially after you got a lot of layers. So we'll go up here to Colors menu and down to Levels. And what we're going to do here is stretch it so that we can actually see something. Because since this is unprocessed, the only thing that's showing up are the stars that were basically overexposed. And we're going to, up here on this top window, this Input Levels, I'm going to grab the center arrow there, which is your mid-tone, and I'm going to stretch it towards the left. So the left side here is your black, then right is the white, and I'm just going to drag it over towards here, and you can drag it quite a ways. And really a lot of it just depends on your image. And click OK. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. And you notice now we've got a histogram showing up. Now when of course this is on the 30-second long exposure. On the 30-minute one, I didn't even have to do any stretch. It has, we'll get to that too, it has a great big one. And it shows up right off. So what I'm going to do here is get rid of this stuff to the left, because that's supposed to be all noise. And we'll just bring it over closer to the left edge of the histogram, which is our actual image data. And the idea is just to get a happy image. I got to remember I'm doing stars only, so I don't want to try to get too crazy with it. If I stretch it too much, it'll start showing all kinds of problems. All I want this to be is just a nice looking star field. And I can go into saturation and try to get some color. So I'm going to go up here at this top one where it says scale, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag it way over to the right and bring some color, and hopefully some of these stars will start to look like something besides white dots. And I think I've made the background look a little funny. I'm going to go to exposure. And what I'm going to do, I'm looking at this part looks kind of dark and it's a little brighter here. And I'm going to take this black level and very gently bring it up. And what it's going to do is just darken the blacks. And I'm going to use this top arrow and just click it once. And go again. If you can drag this over, but it'll make a huge difference fast. So that kind of helped that out. We'll give it another click. And that's not too bad. I'll just click OK. And so now I've got a reasonably good star layer. You can just play with it to whatever your preference is. And this way, when I process the nebula area by itself after StarNet, I can really do pretty aggressive stretches on it and not blow up the stars, because these will just, if you stretch them too much, they'll just turn solid white and get a lot bigger, and they just don't look natural. So now I'm going to process the actual nebula image in Deepsky Stacker. I've already loaded this all up since you saw me load it once before. So here I've just got 4 light frames, and I haven't tried to stretch this at all. And as you can see, the stars are showing up really big, and they're actually turned kind of a funny blue color. And you can see the vignetting. So a 30-minute long exposure at ISO 200 really brings up a lot. And I was in hopes that I could bring up the faintest part of the nebulosity and get it to show up better without doing a bunch of extra stretching and then bringing up more noise too. And I do plan to image this again on multiple nights. So we'll go ahead here and click register checked pictures. I'm using the same, I've got my 4 lights, I've got a dark that I took, and I'm using the same flats and the same bias. And for fun, we'll go in here and compute this number of stars. And this will take a second, so I'll pause. Okay, so it said there was 3,457 stars in it. And click our OK. It says I've got 1 hour and 59 minutes and 56 seconds. So I'd mentioned that this camera is supposed to be able to do a 30-minute maximum exposure on bulb. It's like 29 minutes and 59 seconds, so it's 1 second short of 30 minutes on each one. Used my same bias. I've got my one dark. And, okay, let's see. It says that my offset frames didn't match on the ISO. So I'll reload them. I've got bias frames for ISO 200. So I'll reload that, and it says the same thing about my flats. And I'm not sure if I used those same flats for this or not. I'll have to look and see. That could be a problem if I did. That might have, I ended up with a good picture, but it may have made me fight with it a little more. Okay, so I went and double checked that, and well, it's a good thing. I had one of the things I needed to remember was, since I was using a different camera, I wanted my flat frames and my bias frames from the same camera as my light frames. So I've got that. And they're also at ISO 200. And I believe I've check all. We'll register or check pictures. And now it doesn't have any red messages on here. And this will process fairly quick. I've only got 4 frames of light frames, even though there's 2 hours of light. So we'll do that, and then I'll show it to you after it's done. So it's finished processing, and as you can see, it's kind of ultra bright. And the red is way over to the right. That's one of the main issues you have when you make a camera full spectrum. I'm going to drag it over here towards these other colors. Hit apply. That kind of balances out the color a little bit, which is really the trick of when you get doing the real thing. You just reduce the amount of red. There's a few ways you can do it. As you can see, since it's such a long exposure, I just linked these back up to drag it left, and it's got the red back to the right again. But we'll get it here to where it's a little more visible. I'll pause for a second and adjust it. So I played with it a little, and the preview here is showing the nebulosity more. And you can see the stars are pretty blown out. And I also notice I got something weird up here. I'm not sure what happened there, but I'm going to put this in Starnet and wipe out the stars anyway. That might just be one of those little problems that you can run into doing 30-minute exposures. Something happened. Suppose it could have something to do with being that 200mm lens, the old lens. Maybe there's something going on up there, or even with the flats. I don't know, but it's not going to be a big worry. So I saved that out and got it opened up in Gimp, and we'll take a look at the levels like we did before. As you can see, this one hasn't even been stretched, but yet the exposure was so long that the histogram's actually visible. We'll do some of the same stuff here. And I'm going to just get this to where the nebula shows up quite a bit, and the stars are going to be pretty cruddy anyway, and I'm going to take them out. As you can see how incredibly bright red everything's getting, and I'm going to remove that as well. So when I do this, I just kind of gradually stretch it and play with it. And I'm starting to get a pretty nice little histogram here. So you can see the nebula's starting to show up, but the stars are really a big distraction. That's what Starnet's all about. And I think I'm going to leave this as this amount of stretch in it for now. You can eventually overdo it. You just kind of trial and error and get something decent. And while I'm thinking about it, to get rid of the red, I'll show you one of the ways. I've done this in one of my other videos too. If I go down here to Components, off the Colors menu, Channel Mixer, and I'm just going to go up here to the red channel and reduce the amount of red in it. As you can see, you can bring it back to more normal. You can even take it all the way back and get black and white. And you can see all the stars look blue, which is kind of odd. But those are going to be gone when I run it through Starnet. So now I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to save it under the same name. This XCF is a file name type for Gimp, for the working type one. I'm going to change it to TIFF, and I'm going to add the word Starnet to it just so I know what it is. It's the one that I'm going to run through Starnet, and then I will change the name to Starless for the output of it, for what Starnet puts out. And I'm going to show you that too. So we'll save this. Oh, and it doesn't like my file name. Oh, it's because I clicked save. We'll fix that. I have to put that to export. What was I thinking? So if you want to change it from that XCF, you have to export it. Now you could overwrite, but I don't want to overwrite because I want to keep that other as my original. So I'll export as, then I'm going to put my Starnet in here and the word, and then TIFF, of course. So now we can export as a TIFF. It'll bring up another menu, and I'll pause it while it's doing this because it's gonna, it didn't take long. Sometimes when I export it, it takes a minute or two to do. But next I'm going to transfer this over to Starnet, and I'll show you how that program works. So now let's remove the stars in Starnet++. Here's the folder it was in. This is the application icon, which I've already double-clicked. I've already clicked Browse and found my file that I saved where I added the word Starnet. And then in the window below, I changed the name to Starless because it needs to have a different file name to output. And then I've selected this finer tiles, which is just supposed to give it more detail. Of course, it takes longer to process. Then I hit run, and this is going to take several minutes, so I'll pause during that. But we'll click it, and it should bring up a DOS type of box here. And as long as you don't see an error, it'll take a few seconds here. It'll start. There it goes. It says 0% finished. That means it's actually starting. If you get anything else on there, it's crashed out. Okay, so now it's done. You just get the old-fashioned DOS window, and it says done and 100%. So I just go ahead and close that box. And then I'll have to open up the folder here and find it. And while you're looking at it, there's a picture I took of the Dumbbell Nebula with a ZWO ASI 178MC, which is a planetary camera. And another one of my experiments I did at 0 gain, and I was doing a 10-minute long exposure, and that was in a 4-inch f10 achromatic refractor. Now that is an amazing difference. This is after I ran it through Starnet++, which I also want to point out that I did that on a different computer. Starnet++ needs a 64-bit operating system. That was still a Windows 7 computer though, which is pretty surprising to be able to come up with something like this. So we went from, this is what I put into Starnet++, and all I had to do was tell it which file it was and tell it what name to save it under and push the go button, and it gave me this. So what I'm going to end up doing, see now I can work on this and increase the contrast and everything and not blow up my stars. And then I'm going to put my stars only layer on top of that. And there's more than one way to do it. What I end up doing is I play with the opacity on the stars only layer, and then I usually end up bringing up the contrast and brightness a little bit of the one below it. Because there's a bunch of, some people go and I think they put it on screen, but I just got in a habit. I'd seen I could do the opacity, so I guess whatever works for you. I'll go ahead and duplicate this layer and start playing with it a little bit. You can see we can start stretching, and of course, you know, you got some background noise in here, but I'm going to get rid of that. I can tweak it a lot in here. And if I get some really bad spots in the background, which I usually do get a few, I'll airbrush them out. But I can get rid of most of this just playing with this here. And then I'm also going to show you how to make a mask. So let's see, you can actually, the nebula, it actually goes up in here. You can see some of the faint trails. I'm not sure how much of that shows on the video. That's one reason why I want to do more nights of it. So a lot of this stuff here, that's just noise to my knowledge. And then these black spots are probably where a star was. But I'm going to darken up this background, and those should disappear. So I'm going to duplicate this layer here, and I'm going to go to layer, down to mask, add layer mask. We've got grayscale selected because we don't want to affect the colors with the mask. I'm just going to use it to knock out noise. Go ahead and click add. And it gave us a little white box up here, which is what we want selected. You can select either one here. And then I'm going to go back over to layer again and down to mask. And I want to go to show layer mask. Check this box. Boy, that looks nice. So now we'll go to curves under colors. And I'm going to do the opposite of what I usually do. Usually you drag this up from the middle. This is just a trick I found that I use. I'm sure there's other techniques, maybe better. I'm dragging it down here. I can't go all the way to the very bottom corner or it'll just kick it back out. I'm going to play with that and get it to show up, and this will be pretty dark. So now we're getting a pretty good knockout of that. And you can put other points in here and play with it, do whatever. It's just kind of a feel thing. And I'm going to go to brightness and contrast under colors. See if we crank up the contrast. Let it go through there. What happens is it'll start to get rid of all that background junk. Now here's where it becomes kind of a fine line too, because some of this stuff down here is actually part of the nebula. Some of this other stuff, as far as I know, is noise. There's also some of it up above. So I just kind of keep playing with it. The first time I did it, I actually wiped out more than I should have possibly. I'll go ahead and click OK on that. And I'm going to go over here to my color picker. This is where I'm getting real manual. Here on pick only, try to find a nice white spot. And I don't know if that gave me my color. Let's see. Nope. Do a little Command Z. For some reason, I find that this works better for set foreground color. Click. It actually changed it. Now I'm going to go set background color. Same thing. Now I go to my airbrush, and it's white paint. And I can change my size of my brush over here and the opacity. Right now I've got it 100% opaque, so I'm painting this white, so this is the black area is what's going to show through. So I'm going to turn off the eyeball there. So this area here where it's going to be black is what's going to show through, and the area that I'm painting white is going to get knocked out. So I'm just going to go through here and do this and try not to trash the other stuff, and I'll pause it while I'm doing that and then show you where I'm at. Now as I start to get tighter in here, it's really hard to tell what's actually the nebula and what's just junk. And one thing I can do, I'll reduce the size of the brush over here so it's a smaller oval. Oops, looks like I accidentally went bigger. I was trying to go smaller. There we go. So we'll make it smaller, and I can zoom in using the plus key. I may have to click up here. Cooperate mouse. There, we're getting it to. So I can zoom in a little tighter. And also, if I want, I can play with the opacity. Let's say we reduce it from 100 to 75 or 80. And that'll help to where it doesn't get into the good stuff so much. So I've got this pretty well cleaned up, and I think I'm gonna turn these little dots black where a star was taken out just in case. Might not like the looks of what I get. So again, I'll go down here with my color picker, click in a solid black area, change the background color, do that, and I've got both of those. Turn black, bring up my airbrush. And did I must not have, there we go. I gotta make my size considerably smaller, and I can also zoom in some here. Make that brush smaller again. I'll just get rid of a couple of them big ones, just in case. And then, just deselect that tool. We'll go up here again to Layer, and down to Mask, and now we're going to click Apply Mask. And we're going to find out the mask isn't perfect either, which kind of was weird. It's there, and I'm going to paint some of that in. As a matter of fact, I can, because it's colored now. Let's go to Components, Channel Mixer, and let's just take the red out of that mask, because we don't need, this is just a mask. I don't need it to have color. So now I've darkened up the mask, made it closer to black and white. Click OK. Turn this eyeball back on here to where we're showing, and now my nebula is showing through. And part of it looks a little ruddy. Let's see what we can get here. I want to open up my stars only. So we get the stars only opened up here, and this is an unstretched one. So I'm going to do a quick stretch here and make it look pretty. And I'll pause it since I've already shown you that once. So now I've got a reasonably good stars layer, and the thing to remember when you're doing this one is to just try to concentrate on the stars. It's real easy to go over stretching it. Do a little select all, copy, and we'll go back to this one here that we want to make look more pretty, and edit and paste as a new layer. So it's going to land on top. And I'm going to go up here to opacity in my layers menu, and I'm just going to make this a little less opaque and make stars show up more, or make the nebula underneath it show up. And you can just play with it and get it where you like. You can go ahead and, if you want to bring up the stars more, you can. If you want to bring up the nebula more, you can. I did such a quick and dirty job on that processing of that nebula with that mask. I think my other one actually looks a little prettier. So let's see, I'm up here, pasted layer. We'll name that stars, so I remember what I got. I think I'm going to try to brighten it up a little bit too. Let's see if we can. So I'll go to curves, try to make the stars just a little more aggressive. And then I'll go to exposure again, and I'm going to darken that up just a little by clicking that black level. Clicking the up arrow one at a time there. I think I got more, and the nebula is starting to not look quite as ugly as it did a minute ago. And I'm going to go back and select that layer. See, there's what I got. And I'm going to try to bring that up a little bit to make it show a little more. So I'll go to curves and tweak it, or you could do the same thing with levels. Let's see if we can get it to show up more. I'm not sure if that's doing it. Let's try levels. Got it on the correct layer, yes. That is bringing it up. Yeah, that made it that wider. That brought it up. But you can just sit there and tweak this stuff all you want, and it's better if you take your time and be real patient. I did this kind of fast. But as you can see, you can get something pretty reasonable, and then when you're done, I want to delete the layers that I'm not going to need here. I'll get rid of those two, and then oops, I go one too many. Command Z. And why did that? Oh, it's because, okay, because I never did bring this other one down. I need to merge this down into one layer. That's what was going on. I forgot to merge that down, and when I was doing my curve stuff, I think I was actually playing with the mask. And then you merge down the stars. And now you've got it into one layer, and you can export it as whatever you want, you know, a TIFF or a PNG for posting on Facebook and that. I normally do a PNG, and I changed the name from Starless to Combo is just what I do, and that just means it's a combination of the Starless and the Stars Only or whatever I happen to combine. And I'm going to pause because this looks like it may take a couple of minutes. So I had two 35 megabyte files, and I'm combining them, so this old computer's a little slow. So that is almost completely exported. It's one of the hazards of using an old computer and old equipment, but on the good side, my 6 megapixel camera, the raw files are only like 5 megabytes in size. A little while ago, I was playing with a file. A guy on one of the Facebook groups was nice enough to share an image that he took of Andromeda Galaxy, and he was using a really new camera. It was one of these Sony mirrorless ones. I think it was like an A7 or something. 40 megapixel camera. And the TIFF file that he shared was over 200 megabytes. I don't remember the exact size now. It's big. And my computers, these old ones, were struggling with it. Sometimes it'd crash. Sometimes it'd just drag along. I ended up cropping it and, you know, played with it, but it was a good learning experience. Okay, so that finally completed that. And one of the things you can do, see, I've got this at a 6 megabyte size. And it's actually slightly larger than that. I've got it set Deepsky Stacker to where if my images are drifting around a little bit, it'll go ahead and add the extra size rather than crop it off, which really comes in handy if you're doing multiple nights. I'm going to do a video on that too. I've got some other items that I took pictures of that I did several nights of, and I think that'd make an interesting video. And now when sometimes I like to share some of these on Facebook, and everybody's always talking about how Facebook compresses things and all that. And they say one of the things you can do to help reduce that is to make your image smaller. So I'm going to go from 3047 wide to 2048. I heard that was the magic number to, you know, that'd be the biggest. So I'll scale that down and then save it again as a PNG. It'll be a little bit smaller file. And while I'm thinking about it, notice down here at the bottom, while Gimp has this open, it's actually up to 549 megabytes. When I was talking about that other camera, the one that Sony mirrorless one where the guy posted the file on Facebook to let people process it, it was going up to several gigabytes, and I was running out of RAM. So anyway, I hope this video gives you a little bit of interesting information and shows you that you can do quite a bit with an older piece of equipment. You don't always have to have the newest stuff. Yeah, I think this older, the first one here, I think this one does look better. But like I say, I've spent more time with this and really played with it. But hopefully you enjoyed this video.